Hi everyone, I'm Sunny and today's video will be about Neptune in the ninth house, or if you have Neptune in Sagittarius, this video is for you and I hope it helps you to basically gain more information or just basically review things you possibly already knew, and I hope you enjoy it. So if you guys have Neptune in Sagittarius or Neptune in the ninth, you will notice that you might really enjoy traveling. So maybe you might not always enjoy it, because sometimes Neptune is the planet of fear. So maybe you might enjoy it and then suddenly you end up having fears of it and you want to like hide away. Maybe you hide away because you are scared or because you had like a scary experience traveling. For example, like let's say if you kind of what's it called, is it nomad life where you basically travel, or is it like van life? Am I confusing them? It's basically the one where you travel, and I think I might be correct on both, but it's basically you traveling to different locations, right? And then you might have felt like a very scary experience happened that crossed those boundaries of safety. Maybe you could have been mugged or something, or maybe you could have had things stolen, or maybe they crossed those boundaries of the physical boundaries when it comes to your body, and that was very scary. So you kind of maybe hide away more in like your own secretive locations, or maybe because you actually had those experiences in your natal home area, or maybe in an area where you stayed for long periods of time, maybe. But Neptune is a traveling planet, and so is Sagittarius. So maybe you compared to many other places, you ended up staying in one place, and that one place ended up being kind of eventful in the not so great way, that you had to experience a lot of things that cross those boundaries, and then you end up having escapist ways of dealing with it by traveling a lot or by not staying in one place too much where people might know you and start prying and stuff. And it could be scenarios like that. Or you might also notice that maybe because you end up liking having, sorry, I'm running a little bit low on my air. It's my breathing. I have terrible breathing right now because of allergies, so I apologize. But more or less it has to do with the fact that if you see yourself traveling, you might I lost my train of thought, so I'm just gonna continue. I might remember on my notes, so don't worry about that. But basically when you start traveling, you start learning a lot about other people, because the Sagittarius home house has a lot to do with expansion of the mind, expansion of higher education, expansion of traveling, and it has to do with a lot with like official government, like paperwork and stuff like that, like passports and state IDs or things like that that are more formal, which are pretty cool. But you might end up having, like example, you might end up having one really early on because you enjoyed traveling, or maybe it was because your family was someone more like people that enjoy traveling because of work, or maybe because of their faith, or maybe because they just enjoyed the scenery, or maybe because they just enjoyed that nomadic life. They liked that easygoing lifestyle and you just picked up on it. Or maybe because you were low income, that you had to travel frequently and change locations because you didn't have the stability that you needed to stick to one place. It's not always all that wonderful. Sometimes it's because you don't have the stability in the home place that you tend to navigate more. And it's not always such negative experiences, but it's not always like rose-colored glasses, like I get to be on all these locations because I'm such a free spirit. Maybe you learned to be a free spirit because you enjoyed that, not chaos, but constant moving, that you just kind of enjoyed it. You always saw the brighter side of things. Or if it wasn't as enjoyable at first, it was as you started getting older, for example. So do keep that in mind. But it could also be because you like experiencing different cultures and how they live and how people are, that you don't mind adjusting yourself and how you grew up to very different lifestyles for a while, and then pick up your things and pack up to the next place that's completely different. Like, I do think that you enjoy learning about people and experiencing people as they are part of their own culture, and you immersing yourself in that without having issues with it. This isn't a placement where you feel like you have to impose your own more closed-minded ideas. You're very much open. So like, let's say if you were from a Western world, or a more modern world with more amenities, with more privileges, for example, you end up like moving to a location that's not that privileged, that's more practical, or that's more, you know, resourceful and creative, and you pick up a lot of creative habits along the way that you enjoy. That it's just that you don't really mind mingling with people that are less fortunate than you, because eventually you might end up in that place, like not that specific place, but in that type of scenario that's like, you know, low income or more needy, and you know, things like that. Or you might just enjoy yourself, that you might enjoy doing volunteer work in these locations, or just helping out people, or like handing out things to people from that's in your neighborhood in these new locations, or just helping out each other because you are someone that's very compassionate. It's one of those things that because you wish you had this, you start providing those services for other people too. So it's not really that it bothers you, but maybe sometimes it can be taken advantage of from time to time, where it's like, oh, you can rely on that person. That person's gonna help you fix that car, or that person's gonna help you like give your prep for your events that are like supposed to be like church related or something, or spiritual retreats and stuff like that. So I mean, it could be minor work, but eventually it can be daunting to you to be constantly available for others to use in that way. It's like, you know, you have your own, it's not that you have your own energy, but it's like, you know, it can be daunting to constantly tap into everyone's energy but your own. And it's like, by the end of the day, you're tired and you just want to sleep. So it could be one of those things that it could exhaust you at some point, to constantly be on the go, to constantly meet people and talk to people and immerse yourself in cultures that you just want to hermit. So maybe you just want to hide away from people in these locations, and exotic locations even at that. Or maybe when you are in a location, you kind of just hide away. Like, you have your moments where you're like, okay, it's public time. You get to immerse yourself with people and, you know, help them out and learn from them and, you know, do your own things. But then you have your moments where you kind of have to retreat, to take some time to recuperate, basically. So it could be like that with many other placements too. Sorry, my throat's getting a little so it could be a little frustrating sometimes, but you won't let people know. It's just that it's not that you're like passive aggressive or anything like that. It's just that you want to keep the peace in a way, in a very different peace from Libra peace and Taurus peace, but like a peace where, you know, there's a peace of tranquility, that it's not chaotic. You want to be like a safe haven to people. So you even though you could be extremely tired, you won't purposely try to tell people that you're exhausted. And if you do, it's more like a passing comment, and people just kind of brush it off. Maybe you're like, oh, you'll be fine, just, you know, rest or something. But you could be extremely tired or extremely like ill, or maybe like people might not see that it's kind of catching up to you, and like you need a lot more not discipline when it comes to people and their boundaries, but maybe just more discipline in telling people like, hey, these days I need these days for myself, and then these other days I can help you out with whatever you need, kind of stuff. So it can be like that. I do think there's a possibility that you could have even multiple passports, right? Because you could travel a lot, or you maybe also pick up a bunch of different languages, but that's more Mercury too. But Neptune and Sagittarius does give the ability to expand anything it touches on a deep level. So maybe that's why you pick up Latin, because it's things that you learn to read on scripts and stuff, or you pick up a certain language based on the fact, because of your belief systems, just to translate or understand certain books better, for example. That could be great, which is great because it can be very convenient to learn to handle multiple languages to get yourself around. And maybe it might be tricky at first, or maybe people might not understand you well at first, also because you could be not confusing them, but more so you make them think for a bit, because you try to say one thing, but then certain words come up in a different language, and then this other thing pops up. So it could be like that too. And then you have to consider the fact that you might really enjoy being on water areas. So anything relating close to being on the ocean or lakes or any close body of water, that could be really relaxing for you and soothing and beneficial. But at the same time, it can be a place where you might also find yourself picking up more habits that are more like it could have started as a relaxing habit, but then you not knowing when to stop could have been a little tricky. Like example, you drinking by the beach, you know, and it's like, oh, let's do this weekend, and then it's the next weekend, and then again during the week, and then in the weekend again, and then it's kind of a daily thing. Like it's one of those things that maybe it's not necessarily alcohol, but substances or anything like that, things that you pick up because you start to relax, you start to get comfy, and then you know how to, and then you might not know how to stop, or you might deal with other people kind of pushing you to be like, hey, why don't you try this, and you're like, no, thank you, but then like peer pressure happens, and you know those boundaries are not respected, of like, I just didn't really want to smoke, right, or I didn't want to drink. So it could be one of those things that you might notice too, that over time you might get better, but it's one of those trial and error things. Like I mentioned on almost every video I've had of Neptune, you're gonna learn the hard way. Usually Neptune kind of makes you learn, not the hard way like disciplined, but like, this is a cycle you need to stop doing, because people take advantage of how much you can take, because Neptune doesn't respect that boundary, and usually it's the boundary of what you're intaking and what people are giving you in a good or a bad way. So do keep that in mind. Maybe also you could have a preference when it comes to higher education to go into more spiritual based beliefs. How can I say that? More spiritual based education, like getting a master's degree in theology or something, or getting taking courses unrelated to like maybe like regimented school, for example, but taking courses in regards to expanding your spirituality, for example. That could be it too. So you might enjoy that, or it might be a little bit difficult for some people to pursue certain higher education, and that can also be like associates bachelor's, and anything vocational possibly too. Well, vocational seems a little bit more handy for Neptune. I think it's more doable for them, but it does feel like you might struggle, because the learning process is tricky. The learning process is almost like Mercury and Pisces, where you don't see A, B, C, D. It's very non-linear work. So you can skip several steps and then end up to step Z, and you're like, I can't explain how I got to this step, but I just intuitively know. Your intuition could be really sharp, but if you have to be rational about your intuition or how you got to a certain place because you just know information, that can be tricky to explain. Maybe that's why you might have more trouble when it comes to pursuing these more informative degrees, I guess the best way of saying it. It's like, I can't explain it well. I think I'm channeling that energy too much. It's like, how can I explain that more difficulty of learning? It's not impossible, it's just more difficult, just because being rational is just not, it's difficult. I can't think of another word, but yeah, I think it's much more difficult. And if you do end up pursuing education, it's possibly when you feel a little bit more stabilized with your surroundings, or with you having that extra income maybe to actually pursue education, because you should be wary that if you do pursue this, and you could have money sometimes and sometimes you don't, that you could also have school debt, right? So you could you could rack that up pretty high too. Coming from that 8th house energy, you could have that school debt, and maybe you also have easy access to have lenders to help you out through these higher educations, and that's great, that's fantastic. But you should also realize that maybe you don't always have the income to actually keep up with those payments. So be wary of that, because you're going to end up having to pay much more through the long run. That's what Jupiter can be great energy in this house, but it can also expand the amount of time you can actually have to take to pay back that money, right? So do keep that in mind. I keep wanting to say pile one. I'm so used to doing readings lately that I'm like, oops, bad habit. So do keep that in mind. And it could be a very giving energy. Like, this is such a softy placement, like Neptune and Jupiter. You're just wanting to give, maybe that wanting to give to people, like information and educating people, especially about any religious spiritual beliefs or anything relating to higher education. You love that expansion, whether it's you're moving through traveling and experiencing people, that type of expansion, or that also applies to the expansion of the mind, of the soul, of you growing rich internally. It goes both ways, and you could possibly even experience both at the same time, just in different points in time. But it's a lovely placement, I think, to really learn a little bit about many different people and how they live and how they experience life and what they believe in. And even you believing in yourself can be, it's not hard and restricted, but it does feel like you might not have, it feels like it's like low confidence, like you have low confidence in yourself to be part of this community or a spiritual community. Maybe even like, if it's not always like that, like even esoteric community and spiritual like that, like, you know, you have the capability of doing it, but maybe it's just that little extra push that like you need to like have good luck of, like, have that good belief in yourself that you are capable of doing it and teaching people, because you are very knowledgeable and smart. But maybe you're just shy away from that that teaching placement or that learning placement sometimes, because you fear that you might not be living up to those expectations that maybe others put or you put yourself with. But it is a very kind and forgiving placement, and you kind of learn to manage those energies, and you help others manage them as well. So it's really a really sweet placement, I think. But of course, everything has its like lows and cons. But do keep that in mind, by the way. And you might also notice that you might gravitate to certain Jupiterian people when it comes to teachers, like maybe certain older males, or that are very spiritual, or people who, or even your educators were very, this applies maybe sometimes to the third house too, but this is more like higher learning, so like the non-high school learning, basically, I think, when I place this placement. So I think of anybody you ended up learning, you might have learned the most from people who were very, I don't want to say old and wise, because you don't have to be old to be a teacher, but you might have had more learning experience like that, or your best experiences came from more positive, caring people, and they might have mostly been male, but that doesn't necessarily mean that. I also feel like this can also apply to females too, but it does feel like you enjoy this this softer energy, this very compassionate and nurturing energy. I think people really nurtured you overall with this placement, or they will nurture you, and you will be the person to nurture others, because sometimes it's needed. Sometimes people can be very critical in higher educative realms and courses, so sometimes it's very much needed to have somebody there to kind of push you and give you a pepping up, and really like advocating for you and just standing up for you. Like, it's really nice to have somebody have your back in that way, and support group and support system. So you could have that from others, and you can receive that, but you can also give that away. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I will possibly write more. I love writing notes. It's always something that I end up realizing over time. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you soon. So bye, everybody.